Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to begin talking about the insane state of play whereby the government are now taking their own public inquiry to court in order to stop them carrying out the inquiry that they ordered. I'll also be discussing how Sunak has gotten himself into a monumental mess here. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the government have said that they're going to go to court rather than hand over the evidence that the inquiry are demanding. Independent legal experts do not believe that Sunak really has much chance of winning, if any. They point out that the inquiry chair, former Judge Baroness Hallett, and her top team will all have had vetting and top clearance. Scrutinising sensitive government documents is a normal part of many public inquiries. The only unusual aspect to this inquiry is that the government are blocking it. I gather this is unprecedented. I can well believe it. So it's worth considering just how the Tories got themselves into a position whereby they need to block their own inquiry. Well, this inquiry was classic Johnson short-termism, wasn't it? He needed a way to deflect awkward questions about the handling of the pandemic. Now, he got away with it during the emergency period of the crisis, shall we say, because if you criticised him, he would complain bitterly. Oh, you're facing a once-in-a-century catastrophe. You should be supporting us. You should be supporting the government. We should all be pulling together. You shouldn't be carping from the sidelines. And this worked. The public didn't want to see political bickering. They wanted to see political unity. But once he declared the emergency over, once he tried to say, oh, it's over now, it's over, you can go back to it, it's all fine, he had to start being accountable. The inquiry was a way of deflecting questions until later, because we've got these questions for you, Prime Minister. Oh, is now really the time? Yeah, because the emergency is over, according to you. Oh, right, yeah, we should have an inquiry. Oh, yeah, we'll have an inquiry. But the nature of a public inquiry is that it's going to ask way more awkward questions than opposition MPs can. Not because opposition MPs aren't as good at awkward questions, but you cannot accuse an independent judge appointed by the Prime Minister of being biased against the government. Because bear in mind, this inquiry is independent, it's a public inquiry, but the government set it up and the government chose the judge to lead it. So how can they accuse her of being biased? You know, against other politicians, government ministers can just ignore the question. I mean, we see that on a weekly basis. You know, that doesn't really work against a former judge because they're not having any of it. Especially one who'll just order you to hand over the official records so you can see for herself. You know, ordering this public inquiry was just a case of dealing with a problem in the short term, only to store up a much bigger one down the line. Boris Johnson did that a lot. So now Sunak has a huge problem because the entire government were grossly negligent, including him, during the entire emergency period. In any other industry, you would say criminally negligent. So Sunak has to deal with the inquiry, which represents a serious threat to his government. So in a sense, you can see why he's trying to block these records being handed over. But lots of experts think he has next to no chance of winning, so why is he taking this court action? If he loses, all it will do is expose his lies about transparency. He cannot now claim to be leading an accountable, transparent government, because this is as clear a cover-up as you could get. But the information, if it ends up being handed over anyway, it's like, is it even worth the reputational hit? You know, you think, is he just playing for time? Or does he think he can win? And if he does think he can win, what was it based on? Did the government lawyers say, look, Prime Minister, you've got maybe like a 5% chance of winning this? And he went, right, that's better than nothing. I'll take those odds. Mind you, how much confidence does Sunak really have in his legal team as well? Someone spotted yesterday that they made a mistake on the second line of the legal papers they filed. They neglected to change Queen's Bench to King's Bench. Now, a minor oversight in many ways, but not a sign that attention to detail is high within his team. And if he is just playing for time, how does he think it helps? You know, we know legal processes can take a long time, a really long time. And, you know, if it was going to go beyond the next general election, you would say, absolutely, the delaying tactics can actually help him. But it has been pointed out that due to the intense public interest and the fact that the inquiry is scheduled to proceed to the next stage this summer, the courts will almost certainly expedite the process. We saw this in 2019 during Johnson's illegal prorogation of Parliament. Courts heard the cases very quickly due to the urgency of the matter. It's believed the same will happen here. It'll be the High Court which hears the case, of course, and then when Sunak loses, presumably he will try and move it to the Supreme Court. But if this can all be done in a few months, all Sunak does is buy himself a little bit of extra time at the taxpayer's expense, but not enough time. As I've said in previous videos, the way I see it, Sunak cannot stop this inquiry taking place properly. Even if he does successfully block it, let's say he somehow wins his case. The next Labour government will launch a proper one next year, and they're not going to be difficult about handing over records. But Sunak seems to have almost no chance of actually blocking, only delaying. But if he can't delay it for long enough, why do it at all? I joked yesterday that maybe his team is trying to find a distant relation of Baroness Hallett, who once bought a cake at a Labour fundraiser so they can smear her reputation. I may have only been half joking, because I can see no practical benefit of this court action if all it does is buy him a couple of months. You know, I don't know what scrutiny Sunak particularly fears. I can guess. He launched the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. This did not really help the economy as intended, just wasted another £500 million. What it did do was begin an entirely new wave of infections, which ended up necessitating the second lockdown. Sunak is unlikely to want the public learning more about that. Or the fact that he failed to implement proper sick pay for workers needing to isolate, because the UK's sick pay levels were so low, well, still are, but there was no special payment specifically for the pandemic. They were so poor, there were lots of workers just could not afford to be off work. So people will have concealed positive COVID tests because they couldn't afford to isolate. This was caused by Sunak's decisions. Then there was the VIP lane. We delayed buying in PPE for a very long time while the government set up their corrupt VIP lane scheme, whereby instead of getting the Department for Health and Social Care to sort out the purchase of PPE, they gave money to mates and donors to buy it all on the internet at ridiculous costs. This will be scrutinised as well. And although it was the Cabinet Office mostly managing that, the Chancellor provided the money, so he will have known how every penny of public money was allocated. You know, in my second video today, I'm very likely to be discussing some of the awkward questions the inquiry has already been asking of Boris Johnson. But Sunak is also in the frame for a very uncomfortable level of scrutiny. And unlike Johnson, who will think he can just brazen the questions out by going, well, this is utterly preposterous. Who could possibly believe that I would have done that? Sunak will be very conscious that he owes his position to presenting himself as the calm, sober, rational leader. Boris Johnson promised chaos in his leadership. It was part of the deal. So it's difficult for his supporters to complain when that's what he delivered. Sunak promised transparency and accountability. This is not what they're getting. Sunak has the support of Tory MPs because his personal brand is more popular than that of his party and even senior colleagues. Sunak must fear that this inquiry has the potential to toxify his reputation. And then what? As soon as Sunak is no longer an asset to the party, I'm not suggesting he'll be deposed. I think most Tories realise they can't do that now. They can't change the leader again before the election, otherwise they just completely destroy their reputation. But he will lose all semblance of authority. Being honest, he doesn't really have that much now. I mean, the Conservatives should be focusing on the next election now. And yet this week, about 50 of them have been demanding that Sunak scrap another tax for the rich, inheritance tax. This is not a public priority. It's not even one of the government's priorities. So why is such a large section of his parliamentary party banging on about it? Because there's absolutely no discipline in the party. Imagine how much more out of control this group of babies will become if Sunak loses the regard which a significant proportion of the voting public have for him. So we can see why Sunak would be motivated to block this inquiry, at least until after the election. But it's not clear how he thinks he can block it. I don't think the delay will be worth it to him. If he's been advised that he'll definitely lose, this is a stupid move. If the information is going to come out anyway, he would do better to publicly show his support for the move and then later on claim that the inquiry has been unfairly harsh when everyone was dealing with an unprecedented and unplanned event. Now, neither of which of those is true, but people do believe it, and the media would probably back up the narrative for them. But going to court like this only ramps up public expectation, makes Sunak look shady. And he doesn't have much support for this. Boris Johnson said, oh, release it to the inquiry and be damned. And so are all his supporters. A lot of the right-wing commentators are saying that this is a bad move for Sunak. Even one of his close cabinet colleagues, Grant Shapps, one of his actual staunch allies, has said that Number 10 really ought to just release this information. Even Shapps can see that Sunak's under hiding to nothing here. You know, so all of this is just going to make Sunak lose a great deal more credibility. You know, when he tries to complain about unfair treatment later, it's like, well, you tried to block it. Are we really going to believe you? Because note how Johnson is claiming. He's claiming he's been completely honest about handing and open about handing documents over. He's lying. He's not. He's not handing over the right documents. He's only handing over documents from after the period of time that the inquiry is investigating, not during it. But he's giving the impression of being open so that he avoids looking like he's trying to conceal evidence. But Boris Johnson's involvement in this mess is a whole new chapter. Other news allowing, as I say, I'll be discussing that this afternoon. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.